It is the most beautiful building on the face of the earth. A dome of pure white marble floating above a river plain in northern India, so perfect in its proportions that architects have studied it for 4 centuries and found nothing they would change. A building that shifts color with the passing hours. Pale rose at dawn, blinding white at noon, amber and gold in the evening, silver under the moon. Millions of people visit it every year. It appears on more photographs than almost any structure ever built. And almost none of those visitors ever ask the most astonishing question about it. How, in the middle of the 17th century, without engines, without cranes as we know them, without steel scaffolding, without a single machine more advanced than a pulley and an ox cart, did human beings actually build this thing? How do you float a dome of marble weighing thousands of tons 70 meters into the sky? How do you move mountains of stone across hundreds of miles of India with no railways and no trucks? How do you set millions of pieces of jade, crystal, turquoise, and sapphire into marble so precisely that the joints cannot be seen even today? Today, we are going inside the greatest construction site of the 17th century among the 20,000 workers who labored for some 20 years to discover exactly how the impossible was done. This is how the Taj Mahal was actually built, using advanced AI trained on the chronicles of the Mughal court, the surviving records of the construction, the studies of the architects and engineers who have examined every stone of the building, and the traditions of the craftsmen whose descendants still work marble in the same city today. We have reconstructed the building of the Taj Mahal. And the story begins not with stone, but with grief. In the year 1631, the Mughal emperor Shah Jahan, ruler of one of the richest empires on earth, lost the person he loved most in the world. His wife, Mumtaz Mahal, his constant companion for 19 years, the woman who traveled with him even on military campaigns, died giving birth to their 14th child. The chronicles say the emperor was destroyed by her death. He shut himself away. When he emerged, his beard had turned white. And out of that grief came a decision that would consume a meaningful share of an empire's attention for a generation. He would build for her the most beautiful tomb ever conceived, a building so perfect that the world would never forget her name. Money was no obstacle. The Mughal Empire at this moment commanded staggering wealth, a treasury fed by the taxes of 100 million subjects and the richest trade routes on earth. The emperor summoned the finest architects of the Islamic world, master builders whose names the chronicles record, and under his personal, obsessive supervision, they conceived a design drawn from centuries of Persian and Mughal tomb architecture, but refined beyond anything attempted before. A perfectly symmetrical garden tomb, a white marble mausoleum crowned by a colossal dome, flanked by 4 minarets, set at the end of a long garden of watercourses, framed by a great gateway, a mosque, and a guest house of red sandstone. The site was chosen on a bend of the river Yamuna in the city of Agra, where the building would stand against the sky with the water at its back. And then began the real problem, turning a drawing into a mountain of perfect marble. The first challenge was the ground itself, and it was solved with a piece of engineering that no visitor ever sees. A building of this weight, tens upon tens of thousands of tons of masonry, cannot simply be set down on the soft, shifting soil of a riverbank. It would tilt, crack, and sink. So, the Mughal engineers did something remarkable. They excavated the entire site down to the water table, and they built, in effect, an artificial mountain underground. They sank wells deep into the riverbank soil and filled them with rubble, mortar, and stone, creating great buried columns of masonry standing on firmer ground below. And over these they raised a massive platform of stone and lime mortar, a huge, rigid raft on which the whole complex would stand. Some accounts describe timber being used in the foundations near the river, wood that, kept permanently wet by the river's water, would remain sound for centuries. On top of this hidden foundation rose the great red sandstone platform, and on top of that, the white marble plinth of the mausoleum itself. It is one of the great unsung facts about the Taj Mahal. The most beautiful building in the world is standing on an invisible feat of foundation engineering, and after nearly 400 years beside a river, through floods and earthquakes, it has barely moved. The builders who never get admired, the ones who worked below the ground, are the reason the dome still floats today. Then came the problem of materials, and the answer was an operation of continental scale. The building's soul is its white marble, and that marble came from the famous quarries of Makrana in Rajasthan, well over 300 kilometers away. Every block, and there were countless thousands of them, some weighing several tons, had to be cut from the quarry by hand, with chisels, hammers, and wedges, then hauled across the plains of India to Agra. The transport system was a living machine. Great wooden carts drawn by teams of oxen and buffalo, and, for the heaviest loads, elephants, moving in slow caravans along prepared roads, month after month, year after year, a continuous river of stone flowing across northern India toward the rising tomb. A ramp of packed earth, described in the accounts as miles long, was built so that the stone could be hauled up to the working heights of the monument. And the marble was only the beginning. Red sandstone came from quarries closer by, for the platform, the mosque, the gateway, and the walls. And then came the treasures, the semi-precious stones for the inlay work, gathered from across Asia through the empire's trade networks. Jade and crystal, turquoise and lapis lazuli, sapphire, carnelian, jasper, and more, brought from as far as Tibet, Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, and Arabia, by caravan and by ship, to be cut into slivers and set into the marble like flowers frozen in snow. The Taj Mahal is, in its materials alone, a map of half the world's trade routes assembled at the command of one grieving man. Now consider the workforce, because the numbers are staggering. The accounts speak of some 20,000 workers labouring on the site, drawn from across India and Central Asia, and among them were some of the finest specialist craftsmen alive. There were the stone haulers and labourers in their thousands, the muscle of the site, working in the brutal heat of the Indian plains. There were master masons who could dress a marble block so precisely that the joint against its neighbour would be nearly invisible. There were the dome builders, inheritors of centuries of Persian engineering knowledge. There were calligraphers of the highest rank, entrusted with rendering verses of the Quran in flowing black stone inlay around the great arches, and the master of this calligraphy was honoured so highly that he was permitted, uniquely, to sign his work. There were the inlay masters, the practitioners of the art called parchinkari, who could slice a piece of carnelian thinner than a fingernail and set dozens of individual pieces into a single marble flower so perfectly that no seam can be felt even today, work so fine that a single small flower might contain a great number of separate fitted stones. There were garden designers, hydraulic engineers to build the waterworks that feed the fountains and channels, gilders, carpenters, and smiths. The site was a city in itself. A whole quarter grew up nearby to house the workers, and it still exists as a neighbourhood of Agra today, its name remembering the imperial construction that built it. For around 2 decades, this army worked, generation-long careers spent on a single building, sons taking up the chisels of their fathers. The greatest single challenge was the dome, and here the builders performed their masterpiece. The great central dome of the Taj Mahal rises to roughly 70 meters above the garden, a bulb of marble-clad masonry of colossal weight, and it had to be raised without steel, without engines, and without modern scaffolding. The solution was the ramp and the double shell. The dome is not a single solid mass. Like the great domes of the Persian tradition, it is built as an inner shell and an outer shell, the inner dome forming the ceiling seen from inside the tomb chamber, the soaring outer dome giving the building its famous silhouette with a structural gap between them. This double shell construction dramatically reduced the weight while allowing the exterior to rise far higher and more dramatically than a single dome could. To raise the materials, the builders used their great earthen ramp, along with timber scaffolding, hoists, and pulleys, hauling the bricks of the dome's core and the marble of its skin upward, course by course, the dome closing in on itself ring by ring, each ring locked by gravity and geometry, until the final courses were set and the great gilded finial was raised at the very top. Around the dome, 4 slender minarets were raised at the corners of the plinth, and here the builders included a detail that reveals how carefully they thought. The minarets lean, very slightly, outward. This was deliberate. In an earthquake, if the minarets fell, they would fall away from the tomb, not onto it. The builders of the most beautiful building in the world were also quietly planning for catastrophe 4 centuries ahead. And then there is the detail work, the part that turns engineering into magic. The Taj Mahal's surfaces are not merely white, they are alive with ornament, and every piece of it was done by hand. The marble is carved in low relief with flowers so delicate they seem to bend in an imaginary breeze. The inlay work traces vines, blossoms, and arabesques across the white stone in coloured gems, and around the great arched portals, verses of the Quran flow in black calligraphy, and here the designers used a subtle optical trick. The lettering grows slightly larger as it rises higher up the arch, so that, seen from the ground, it all appears perfectly even. They understood perspective and built the correction into the stone. The marble screens around the cenotaphs inside were carved from single slabs into lattices of openwork so fine they resemble lace, work that consumed years of a master carver's life. Even the acoustics were considered. The interior of the dome holds a long, haunting echo, so that a prayer spoken inside seems to hang in the air. And the building's famous changing colours are themselves a design choice. The Makrana marble is slightly translucent, drinking and releasing the light, which is why the tomb glows rose at dawn and silver by moonlight, as if it were breathing. Nothing about this building is accidental. Every effect that moves visitors today was planned, engineered, and executed by hand by craftsmen who knew exactly what they were doing. The work was largely complete after roughly 2 decades. The mausoleum finished first and the surrounding complex in the years after, at a cost that the chronicles record in sums so vast they were compared to the revenues of provinces. And around the finished building, the legends began to grow, and we should deal honestly with the most famous of them. It is often said that the emperor had the hands of the craftsmen cut off, or their eyes put out, so that they could never build anything so beautiful again. There is no credible historical evidence for this story. It appears in no contemporary account, and it belongs to a family of nearly identical legends told about beautiful buildings all over the world, from Russia to Europe to India. The truth appears to be the opposite. The master craftsmen were honoured, well paid, and their skills continued and were passed down. The marble working traditions of Agra survive to this day. The other great legend is the Black Taj, the story that the emperor planned to build an identical tomb for himself in black marble across the river, connected by a bridge, a mirror image in darkness. It is a haunting idea and remains beloved, but the evidence for it is thin and debated, resting on a later traveller's account and some ambiguous remains across the river. What actually happened to the emperor is sadder than any legend. In his old age, Shah Jahan was overthrown by his own son, who seized the throne and imprisoned his father in the fort of Agra, upriver from the tomb. And there the old emperor spent his final years, a prisoner in a marble tower, from whose windows he could see, across the bend of the river, the white dome of the tomb he had built for his wife. When he died, his son buried him in the Taj Mahal beside Mumtaz, his cenotaph placed next to hers, the only asymmetrical element in that entire perfectly symmetrical building, as if even in death he entered her monument as a guest. The man who built the most beautiful building on earth spent his last years able only to look at it, and entered it only in death. That is how the Taj Mahal was actually built. Not by magic and not by legend, but by an invisible underground mountain of foundations sunk into a riverbank, by a river of marble hauled 300 kilometers by oxen and elephants along a miles-long earthen ramp, by 20,000 workers laboring for some 20 years in the heat of the Indian plains, by a double-shelled dome raised ring by ring on timber and pulleys to float 70 meters in the air, by minarets tilted outward to fall away from the tomb in an earthquake, by calligraphy sized larger as it climbs so it reads evenly from the ground, and by inlay masters setting slivers of gemstone into marble flowers so perfectly that 4 centuries later you still cannot feel the joints. It was one of the greatest feats of engineering and craftsmanship in human history, carried out with muscle, mathematics, and hand tools, and it worked so well that the building has barely moved in 400 years. And behind all of it stands the strangest fact of all. This supreme achievement of construction was not a fortress, a palace, or a temple to power. It was a tomb for one woman, built by a man who could command the wealth of an empire, but could not keep the person he loved alive. The empire that built it is gone. The emperor died a prisoner within sight of it. The workers' names are almost all forgotten. But the building they raised still stands on its hidden mountain of stone beside the river, changing color with every hour of the light. The most beautiful thing human hands have ever made, and the most extraordinary construction story almost no one ever asks about. 20,000 people spent 20 years building a broken heart in marble, and they built it so well that it will outlast us all.